Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Cameron. Senator Ludlam, then Senator Madigan.
Thanks very much, Chair. Mr Wilkins, any update on whether the government's, or the department I should say, is progressing data retention since I was here an hour or two ago?
No.
Still don't know? Have you made some inquiries?
Yes, we're making inquiries. It'll be some time.
Okay, amazing. Okay.
Well, we're trying to prove a negative.
No, just trying to tell me whether anybody's working on it or not. But
No, but I need to ask everybody, make sure that there's nothing happening in any corner of the department that I don't know about on this one.
Very good. Okay. Either to you, Mr Wilkins, or to the attorney, what was the purpose of Australia's bugging of the cabinet rooms of East Timor in 2004?
Well, we don't concede videos. We don't comment on that.
Well, Senator Ludlam, your question is based on an assertion which the government does not concede. More generally, without in any way, you should know that the governments of both sides of politics neither confirm nor deny nor comment on operational matters.
We've got about 30 seconds in. First mention.
Well, that's because it's the answer to the question you asked, Senator, and if you'd been anticipating that answer as your wise crack suggests, then perhaps you should have had the good judgment not to ask the question.
The Prime Minister has stated that Australia doesn't leverage or deploy intelligence agencies for commercial purposes. Is that correct, or is he in error?
What the Prime Minister says is correct.
Is correct, okay. The review panel established by President Obama to look at NSA surveillance specifically recommended that its mass surveillance apparatus not be used for economic espionage. Does the Abbott government agree with this recommendation, and will it place the same restriction on our own intelligence services?
The government's position is as outlined by the Prime Minister.
Okay, so no reforms necessary because we're already there.
The government's position is as outlined by the Prime Minister.
Okay. Isn't espionage for economic purposes specifically enabled by relevant legislation establishing ASIO and ASIS activities, so the specific phrase being Australia's national economic wellbeing?
Well, Senator, it's not for me to interpret Commonwealth Acts of Parliament for you, and nor is it appropriate for me to offer an interpretation of statutory language. That's really a legal question.
Okay, so I thought it would get some value out of speaking to the Commonwealth's first law officer. So
well,
my reading
you always
would be,
will, Senator, if you ask relevant questions.
It's entirely relevant. So the specific phrase being Australia's national economic wellbeing does enable the exercise or the enlivening of ASIO and ASIS's powers. That's certainly my reading of the Act. So,
well, if that's your reading of the Act, what you seem to be doing, Senator, is equating commercial purposes with the statutory phrase Australia's economic wellbeing.
National economic wellbeing.
They are not identical.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's right. Why did you personally authorise ASIO's attempt to suppress information about the bugging of the East Timorese cabinet? Can you just take us through the process?
Well, I'm sorry, Senator Ludlam. Your question is based on an assertion which I don't accept.
You deny that Australia bugged?
I don't accept it. I don't accept it.
Okay. You don't accept that Australia bugged the East Timorese cabinet rooms. Has the individual whose passport was seized...
I don't accept your assertion, Senator Ludlam.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Has the individual whose passport was seized in relation to those raids had his passport returned to him?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Senator Ludlam.
An individual had his passport seized in the ASIO raids that you authorised on the legal...
Which particular ASIO operation are you referring to now?
You must have so many afoot. A raid on the legal offices of council assisting the East Timorese government in the ICJ.
If you're referring to a search that was conducted by ASIO on the premises of a law firm of which Mr Bernard Colery was the principal, is that the case you're referring to?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, now that you've identified it, what's your question?
Whether he's had his passport returned to him.
I don't know, and I wouldn't know, because that would be a question for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Foreign Affairs and Trade. So that's not something that you are aware of.
Well,
and
the
nobody
Attorney
else.
General's Department is not responsible.
You authorised the
for-
warrant.
The warrant was a warrant to conduct a search, because on the basis of the information placed before me, I was satisfied that the statutory tests were met.
But
The withdrawal or return of a passport is a matter not for the Attorney General's Department or its agencies, but for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Okay. You don't have any... Okay. Let's come to the material that was seized, and you've made statements in the public domain that you assured the public that the material that was seized in that search would not be made available to anybody involved in Australia's side of defending that legal action.
That's
in the ICJ.
correct, and I made that very clear at the time, and that instruction, I'm sure, has been followed by ASIO.
Yeah, you made that commitment prospectively. I'm now asking you in retrospect, can you assure the Senate that that material has not been made available?
Well, that's what I'm told by ASIO, and I believe them. I'm not the custodian of the material. ASIO is. They'll be here later today. Perhaps you could ask them, but
we'll see if
I
get more than
have
30
every
seconds
confidence
in.
that my instruction would have been observed.
So ASIO have assured you of that. Who else have you sought assurances from that that instruction's been followed?
Well, ASIO is the only custodian of the material.
Okay. Have you made any other commitments or any other inquiries with anybody representing Australia?
Well, I don't know if this is quite what you're after, but I also gave an undertaking to the International Court of Justice that I wouldn't myself acquaint myself with the material because I anticipated that I was conflicted, because I am both the Minister responsible for ASIO and also the Minister responsible for the conduct of Australia's proceedings in both the International Court of Justice and the arbitration under the CMATS Treaty. And those responsibilities are, in my view, non-delegable and non-transferable.
All right.
Therefore, I took the view that the only way in which I could resolve the conflict question satisfactorily was to give that undertaking, which I have, of course, observed.
Which you have acquitted, okay. Was the warrant for specific documents, or was it open-ended?
I think that's a question you're going to have to ask of ASIO.
You know exactly what their response will be.
Well, it's a question you're going to have to ask of ASIO. I don't have a copy of the document at hand, so I can't actually answer your question with the particularity it seeks, and it may be that it's not something that I cannot answer at all in a public forum, but nevertheless, why don't you re-put that question to ASIO, and they may be in a position to give you fuller information.
I'll do that. I'll just put one more, if I may, Chair, because I recognise we're running quite short of time. What work has been undertaken on the impact on Australia's national security of the revelations of the whistleblower Edward Snowden, in particular on whether his revelations have placed Australian lives in danger? Now, I put a similar question to you, Minister, in the chamber a number of weeks ago. But what I'm particularly interested in is whether you can identify a single individual whose life's been placed in danger. And the context for this is that the review panel established by President Obama was unable to identify an individual whose life's been put at risk, or a single terrorist attack that's been thwarted by the mass surveillance carried out by the NSA and its partners, including those of the Australian government. So if the US government's been unable to identify any such instance, I just wonder what particular intelligence you have to hand to contradict that.
I suspect you won't tell us here.
It's always worth asking though, isn't it, Chair?
First, Senator Ludlam, although you, no doubt for rhetorical purposes, insist on describing Mr Snowden as a whistleblower, you would be aware that Mr Snowden, even if his motives and conduct be taken at face value the way he describes them satisfies none of the tests of a whistleblower under Australian or indeed, so far as I'm aware, American law.
Well, nor has he been charged with treason, as you seem to assert.
Secondly, Senator, you asked me, am I aware of particular cases?
Any at all? And the United States government is not.
Senator Ludlam, you asked me if I'm aware of particular cases. The answer to your question is yes, on the basis of the intelligence briefings I received.
You're in possession of information that even President Obama is not. Have you shared that intelligence with him?
You asked me a question, I've given you a direct answer.
Have you shared that with our colleagues in the US?
The intelligence agencies speak to their interlocutors in allied countries, including the United States, on a constant basis.
Provide us perhaps on notice, because I know I'm testing the patience
I
of the
won't
chair.
be, as you well know, Senator Ludlam.
We just have to take your word for it.
As you've asked me a question, and I've given you a direct answer.
Provide us with any documentary evidence of any...
As you know, Senator Ludlam, under no circumstances would any Australian government provide in an open forum the intelligence briefings that its intelligence agencies prepare for the Attorney-General and other relevant ministers.
And I'm afraid we'll have to leave that
I'll yield, Chair.
there. Senator